Anger is a powerful emotion, one that can consume our thoughts, dictate our actions, and leave us feeling out of control. We've all experienced moments where our anger gets the best of us, where a single word or action spirals into a reaction that we later regret. But what if there were a way to break this cycle? What if, instead of letting anger control us, we could learn to understand it, to master it, and to use it as a force for positive change? In today's video, we'll explore 7 Stoic strategies for overcoming anger, drawn from the timeless wisdom of philosophers like Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, and Epictetus. The Stoics viewed anger not as an insurmountable foe, but as a challenge, one that could be met with courage, understanding, and reason. They believed that by mastering our response to anger, we could lead a more fulfilling and virtuous life, one free from the turmoil of uncontrolled emotions. These strategies are not just philosophical musings. They are practical, actionable steps that you can take to transform your relationship with anger. Whether you're struggling with frustration at work, conflict in your relationships, or simply the daily irritations of life, these Stoic techniques will help you regain control, find peace, and build a stronger, more resilient mind. So if you're ready to take control of your emotions and embrace a life guided by reason rather than reaction, let's dive into these 7 powerful strategies together. 1. Understand why you're really angry. Anger is like a storm that suddenly overtakes us, obscuring our vision, blinding us to the reality of the situation, and pushing us towards actions we often regret. But what if, instead of allowing ourselves to be swept away by this storm, we took a moment to understand why it is happening? What if we looked at the root cause of our anger and asked ourselves, is this anger justified? What is truly causing me to feel this way? The Stoics believed that understanding the true source of our emotions was the first and most crucial step in mastering them. Marcus Aurelius often found himself amidst the chaos of an empire. The demands on his time, the conflicts between provinces, the personal betrayals, all these could have easily driven him to anger. Yet Marcus knew that to effectively lead, he had to remain in control of his emotions. In his writings, he frequently reminded himself to dig deep and understand the root of his feelings before acting. He wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." This statement is a call to look inward, to examine what lies beneath the surface of our anger, and to use reason to guide our response. Imagine a Roman soldier who is angered by a harsh order given by his commanding officer. On the surface, his anger seems to be directed at the officer's words, the way he spoke, the command he gave. But if the soldier takes a moment to dig deeper, he might discover that the real cause of his anger is a sense of being disrespected, of not feeling valued for his contributions. Perhaps it is a fear that he is not good enough, that he is being judged unfairly. By understanding the true source of his anger, the soldier can choose how to respond, whether to let it fester or to address the underlying issue with clarity and strength. The Stoics teach us that our emotions, including anger, are often based on our interpretations rather than on the events themselves. Epictetus famously said, "It is not things that disturb us, but our interpretation of their significance." This means that when we experience anger, it is usually because we have attached a particular meaning to what has happened. Perhaps we feel slighted, or disrespected, or threatened in some way. But what if our interpretation is incorrect? What if the merchant who seemed rude was simply having a bad day? What if the friend who didn't return our call was dealing with their own struggles? By taking the time to understand what is really causing our anger, we can often find that it is based on assumptions, misunderstandings, or fears rather than on actual offenses. Consider Marcus Aurelius again, sitting in his study late at night, writing in his journal. He might reflect on an argument he had earlier in the day, a senator who opposed his decision, perhaps in a heated and disrespectful manner. Instead of immediately reacting in anger, Marcus would pause and ask himself, why did this bother me so much? Was it the senator's words, or was it my fear that others might lose respect for me? Was it a threat to my authority, or was it my own pride that felt wounded? By breaking down his anger in this way, Marcus was able to see the situation clearly, to strip away the unnecessary emotions, and to respond with wisdom rather than impulse. Understanding why we are really angry also helps us avoid misdirecting our emotions. Often we carry anger from one situation into another, like the man who, after a frustrating day at work, comes home and finds himself irritated with his family. His anger is not truly about his children leaving their toys on the floor. It is about the frustrations he has carried home with him, unresolved and unexamined. The Stoics encourage us to address our emotions at their source, to prevent them from festering and spreading into other areas of our lives. Imagine another scenario: a woman in modern times who feels overwhelmed by her responsibilities at home and at work. She finds herself becoming increasingly short-tempered, snapping at her loved ones for small things. If she takes the time to reflect, she may realize that her anger is not truly about the dishes left in the sink or the email she received. It is about feeling unsupported, about the weight of expectations placed on her shoulders. By understanding the true source of her anger, she can begin to address it in a meaningful way. By seeking support, by setting boundaries, by allowing herself the compassion she needs. The Stoics believed that understanding the root of our emotions required self-reflection and honesty. It is not always easy to admit the true causes of our anger. It may reveal insecurities, fears, or wounds that we would rather ignore. But only by bringing these hidden aspects of ourselves into the light can we begin to heal and grow. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." If our thoughts are dominated by unexamined anger, our soul too becomes darkened, colored by this emotion. But if we take the time to understand our anger, to see it clearly, we have the power to change its color, to transform it into understanding, compassion, and strength. One of the most practical ways to begin understanding your anger is to journal about it, much like Marcus Aurelius did. When you feel anger rising, take a moment to write down what happened, how you felt, and most importantly, why you think you felt that way. Ask yourself questions. What was I expecting in this situation? Why did I feel threatened? Is there something deeper at play here? By engaging in this kind of self-dialogue, you create space between the trigger and your response, a space where reason can take the lead. If you find yourself struggling with anger, try to practice this Stoic approach. Pause. Look inward. Ask yourself, why am I really angry? Is it because someone has truly wronged you, or is it because of something within you? An expectation, an insecurity, a fear? By understanding the true source of your anger, you empower yourself to respond in a way that aligns with your values, rather than being controlled by an emotion that has gone unchecked. Remember, as Marcus Aurelius wrote, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. The key to mastering anger is not to suppress it, but to understand it, to look deeply at its source, to challenge the thoughts that fuel it, and to choose a response that reflects who you truly want to be. In doing so, you transform anger from a destructive force into a powerful opportunity for growth, for wisdom, and for true emotional mastery. 2. Take a deep breath before you respond. When anger arises, it often feels like a fire bursting into flames, ready to consume everything in its path. We all know that split second when we can choose either to throw more fuel on the fire or to step back and extinguish it. The Stoics believed in the value of this pause, not to suppress the fire, but to see it for what it is, to let it dissipate before it causes harm. Taking a deep breath before reacting allows us to step away from the chaos of emotion and into a space of clarity, even if just for a fleeting moment. Imagine Marcus Aurelius, who spent many nights contemplating his thoughts, coming across a difficult issue. A rebellion in one of the Roman provinces. The initial news might have provoked fear or anger, perhaps a sense of betrayal. However, instead of rushing to a decision out of anger, Marcus would sit quietly, take a breath, and reflect on the broader context. He understood that actions taken in haste are rarely wise, and that a breath, a small but powerful act, could create the distance necessary to make an informed decision. Instead of letting the urgency of the moment push him into reaction, he allowed space for reason to guide him. Taking a deep breath may sound too simple, but it's a practice of profound significance. In Stoic philosophy, apatheia, or freedom from irrational passions, is central to the pursuit of a balanced life. A single deep breath is a small but powerful way of reclaiming control over those irrational passions. By focusing on the breath, you reconnect with the present moment and find a grounding point amidst the storm of emotions. You give yourself a chance to think clearly rather than getting swept up in the intensity of your feelings. Imagine a craftsman in ancient Rome, diligently working on a finely crafted piece when suddenly, a neighbor barges in with complaints about noise. The craftsman's first instinct might be to defend himself, to match the neighbor's anger with his own. But instead of reacting impulsively, he takes a deep breath. He notices the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. This small pause gives him a chance to remember that the neighbor's frustration may not entirely be about the noise. It might be rooted in stress or other problems. That single breath, that moment of calm reflection, changes everything. Instead of escalating the situation, he chooses to speak calmly, transforming a potential conflict into an opportunity for understanding. One of the reasons why anger escalates is because we react without truly thinking. Anger thrives on immediacy. It needs a quick response to feed its flames. But when we take a breath, we break that immediacy. We remind ourselves that we are not bound to the momentary surge of frustration. We are capable of stepping back, of choosing not to let anger dictate our actions. The Stoics, particularly Seneca, taught the importance of delay in managing anger. Seneca said, "The greatest remedy for anger is delay." Taking a breath is a tangible way of enacting that delay. It's a way of saying, "I will not be rushed by this emotion." Imagine a scene from today. A young professional receives harsh criticism from a colleague. The instinct is to react, to justify oneself, to snap back. But instead of letting those impulses dictate behavior, they take a slow, deliberate breath. In that moment, they realize that their colleague's words, while harsh, might contain valuable feedback. Or perhaps they see that the colleague's frustration is about something else entirely. The breath gives them the space to listen, to process, to decide how they want to respond. Not from a place of ego or anger, but from a place of reason. Taking a deep breath is also a way of reminding ourselves of our own humanity. Anger often makes us feel like we must fight, like we must win, like we must be right at all costs. But in that breath, we remember that there is no true victory in letting anger dominate our actions. Marcus Aurelius, who dealt with matters of life and death, of power and politics, often reminded himself of the fleeting nature of life. He wrote, "How much more grievous are the consequences of anger than the causes of it?" A single breath gives us the space to see those consequences and to choose a different path. Picture an elderly Roman teacher sitting in his classroom as a young student disrespects him in front of others. Anger could easily swell in his chest. After all, he's given his life to teaching, to imparting wisdom. But the teacher takes a deep breath, remembering that his purpose is not to dominate or humiliate, but to educate. The breath softens his reaction, turning what could have been a scolding into a moment of reflection for the student. He chooses to ask questions instead of making accusations, guiding the student to understand the value of respect. To make this practice a part of your daily life, start small. The next time you feel anger bubbling up, close your eyes for a brief moment and take one deep breath in and out. Notice how it feels. Notice how, even for a moment, the anger loses some of its urgency. It may still be there, but it becomes something you can look at, rather than something that takes control of you. In that space, you can make a conscious decision about what to do next. You might still need to address a problem, but now you can do it from a place of strength, rather than from a place of emotional reactivity. Remember, as Marcus Aurelius wisely said, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Taking a deep breath before you respond is a small but mighty act of reclaiming that power. It's a reminder that you are more than your immediate emotions, that you have within you the ability to act with wisdom, with compassion, and with clarity. Let that breath be your anchor, your reminder of the person you wish to be. A person who responds, rather than reacts, a person who chooses understanding over impulsiveness, and a person who lives in alignment with their highest values. 3. Imagine how things could be worse when frustration and anger take hold. It's often because we are fixated on what went wrong, on how something or someone did not meet our expectations. We let that sense of injustice or disappointment grow until it consumes us, narrowing our focus until all we can see is the negative. The Stoics, however, taught us a powerful tool for expanding our perspective and finding peace: negative visualization. By imagining how things could be worse, we are reminded of the true nature of our situation and can often see that our current frustrations are not as unbearable as they seem. Consider Marcus Aurelius, a philosopher king who was not immune to suffering or setbacks. Throughout his reign, Marcus faced numerous challenges: war, betrayal, plague, and personal losses. He had every reason to be consumed by anger and despair at times, but instead of focusing solely on what was wrong, Marcus often reflected on how much worse things could have been. He understood that by doing so, he could appreciate the present moment for what it offered, rather than feeling overwhelmed by what was lacking. He wrote, "Do not indulge in dreams of having what you have not, but reckon up the chief of the blessings you do possess, and then thankfully remember how you would crave for them if they were not yours." This practice of considering a worse outcome allows us to cultivate gratitude, even in challenging situations. Imagine a Roman merchant struggling after a storm has destroyed a shipment of his goods. He feels the weight of the loss, months of work gone, profits diminished, and frustration bubbling to the surface. But instead of allowing himself to be consumed by anger, he takes a moment to think, what if I had been on that ship? What if the storm had taken not just the goods, but the lives of the crew? This simple exercise in imagining a worse outcome shifts his perspective. He still has his health, his family, and his ability to rebuild. The loss of goods, while challenging, is not insurmountable, and recognizing this helps him regain a sense of calm and purpose. Negative visualization is not about ignoring problems or pretending that everything is perfect. It is about grounding ourselves in reality and recognizing that things could always be worse. The Stoics believed that by regularly contemplating worst-case scenarios, we could prepare our minds for whatever might come and reduce the shock or pain when difficult times did arise. It is a way of pre-fortifying ourselves, of building mental resilience, so that we are not taken by surprise when life inevitably presents us with challenges. Consider a modern scenario: a woman who has just missed an important job promotion. She feels anger bubbling up. Why was I overlooked? Was my hard work not enough? This anger could easily consume her, leading her to resent her colleagues or even doubt her own worth. But instead of letting this frustration fester, she practices negative visualization. She thinks, what if I had lost my job entirely? What if I had no opportunity to prove myself again? By imagining these worse outcomes, she begins to feel a sense of relief. While not getting the promotion is disappointing, she still has a job she loves, opportunities to grow, and the ability to work towards her goals. This shift in perspective does not eliminate her ambition, but it allows her to let go of the destructive power of her anger and instead focus on her next steps. Marcus Aurelius often used this method to ground himself in gratitude. During times of political instability or personal loss, he would reflect on the fragility of human life and the transient nature of all things. Loss is nothing else but change, and change is nature's delight, he wrote. By contemplating the impermanence of everything around him, he was able to accept his circumstances more easily and maintain a sense of balance. Negative visualization allowed him to see beyond immediate frustrations and recognize the bigger picture, how fortunate he was to have had what he did, even if only for a while. Imagine a Roman general returning home after a difficult campaign. The losses were heavy, and the weight of failure feels immense. Anger rises at the thought of what went wrong, strategies that failed, allies that betrayed them. But as he enters the gates of Rome and sees the bustling city, the children playing, the market vendors calling out, he allows himself to think of what could have been. He imagines the city empty, sacked by invaders, his family lost. In that moment, the anger begins to dissolve, replaced by a profound sense of gratitude for what remains. The campaign may not have gone as planned, but Rome still stands, and for that, he is deeply grateful. This practice of imagining worse outcomes also helps us to prepare mentally for life's inevitable difficulties. By frequently visualizing how things could go wrong, we build a kind of mental immunity. If the worst happens, We are not caught off guard. We have already considered it, faced it in our minds, and understood that we could endure it. This doesn't mean we live in constant fear of bad things happening, but rather that we are ready for them when they do. Think about a father dealing with his teenage son's rebellion. The arguments have been getting worse, and the father's frustration is reaching its limit. He could choose to react with anger, to escalate the conflict, and let his emotions dictate his actions. Instead, he takes a moment to think of a worse scenario. What if my son refused to speak to me at all? What if he had chosen a dangerous path that took him away from home? This reflection allows him to see that while their relationship is strained, it is still there. There is still hope, still a chance to mend and rebuild. With this perspective, he approaches his son not with anger, but with patience and love, ready to try again. Negative visualization is not about dwelling on the negative, but rather about putting things into context. When we face challenges, setbacks, or frustrations, it can feel as if the world is against us, as if the situation is unbearable. But by actively imagining how things could be worse, we can reduce the emotional intensity of the moment and find a sense of peace in what remains. It is a reminder that even when things are difficult, there are still blessings to be found, still reasons for gratitude. If you find yourself overwhelmed by anger, try this Stoic practice. Pause for a moment and imagine, how could this be worse? What other challenges could I be facing that I am not? This doesn't mean you need to diminish your current struggles, but rather that you gain perspective. You remind yourself that, even amidst difficulties, there is often still something to be thankful for, still something that could have been lost but wasn't. As Marcus Aurelius said, think of what you have rather than of what you lack. Of the things you have, select the best and then reflect how eagerly they would have been sought if you did not have them. By practicing negative visualization, we train ourselves to see not just what has gone wrong, but also what remains, what is still within our grasp. This shift in focus allows us to move forward without the burden of anger, to act from a place of gratitude and strength rather than frustration and despair. 4. See the bigger picture. One of the most powerful tools the Stoics provided us is the ability to rise above the moment, to gain perspective, and to see the bigger picture. Anger, at its core, is a reaction to something immediate, a comment, an action, a momentary failure that strikes at our pride or sense of justice. But what if, instead of zeroing in on that one moment, we could step back and see it within the context of the entirety of our lives? The Stoics teach us that many of the things that upset us are, in the grand scheme, insignificant. By seeing the bigger picture, we can often dissolve our anger and find a sense of calm that transcends the immediate frustration. Marcus Aurelius understood this well. As Emperor of Rome, he faced constant turmoil, political intrigue, wars, personal betrayal, and even the devastation brought by a plague. Yet amidst all of this, Marcus often reminded himself that everything, including his own rule, was part of a much larger story, one that stretched far beyond his lifetime. He wrote, "Consider, for example, the times of Vespasian. You will see all these things, people marrying, raising children, falling ill, dying, fighting wars, celebrating festivals. Everything is transient as it was then and will be again." For Marcus, this perspective allowed him to see that his challenges, no matter how difficult, were simply part of the natural ebb and flow of life. Imagine a Roman senator, outraged by a perceived slight during a debate. He feels his pride wounded, his position challenged, and anger rises. But instead of acting impulsively, he takes a moment to reflect. He considers the years of service he has given, the many debates he has won, and the grand purpose of his work, to serve the people of Rome. When he steps back to see the bigger picture, the sting of the slight fades. What seemed like an attack is reduced to what it truly is, a fleeting moment in a long career, one that will be forgotten with time. With this perspective, he can respond with calm dignity rather than the heat of anger. The practice of seeing the bigger picture involves recognizing how small each individual moment is in the context of an entire lifetime. When anger arises, it is usually because we are so focused on the immediate situation that we forget everything else. We let the moment define us, forgetting that we are more than this one experience. By stepping back and considering how we will feel about the situation in a month, a year, or even a decade, we can often realize that our anger is unnecessary. Think of a craftsman in ancient Rome. After spending weeks crafting a beautiful vase, a careless assistant knocks it off the table, shattering it into pieces. The craftsman feels his anger flare, weeks of work gone in an instant. But he pauses, takes a breath, and remembers the bigger picture. He has crafted many vases in his life, each one beautiful, each one eventually broken or lost. He remembers that his skill lies not in one single piece, but in the lifetime of work he has created and will continue to create. The loss of this one vase, while painful, is not the end. With this perspective, he finds the strength to let go of his anger and begin again. The Stoics also emphasized the interconnectedness of all things. Marcus Aurelius often reflected on the fact that each person, each action, each event was part of a larger whole. He wrote, "All things are interwoven, and the bond is sacred, and scarcely anything is alien to any other. For they have been arranged together in their places and work together to form one orderly universe." By seeing our own challenges as part of this larger tapestry, we can often let go of the sense of personal offense or injustice. We can see that the person who angered us, the event that frustrated us, is just one small thread in the vast fabric of life, each with its own place and purpose. Imagine a modern office worker, frustrated by a colleague who has taken credit for their idea. The anger is immediate, the sense of injustice clear. But instead of letting that anger dictate their next steps, the worker chooses to step back and see the bigger picture. They consider their career as a whole, their achievements, their growth, the respect they have earned. They realize that this one incident, while unfair, does not define them. They remember their long-term goals, their reasons for doing this work, and decide that their energy is better spent on moving forward, rather than getting stuck in the moment. This larger perspective does not mean ignoring the issue, but it does mean approaching it with a calm and measured response, rather than letting anger dictate their actions. The Stoic approach of seeing the bigger picture is also about embracing the temporary nature of all things. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself often of the impermanence of life, that everything, even our troubles, will eventually pass. Everything we see is a perspective, not the truth, he wrote. Our anger is often rooted in a belief that what we are experiencing is permanent or insurmountable. But by reminding ourselves of the bigger picture, that time moves on, that challenges fade, that life is a series of moments, not just one, we can begin to let go of the intensity of our emotions and find peace in the larger context. Consider a Roman farmer, watching as a storm destroys his crops. His first instinct is anger. Months of work, hopes for a good harvest, gone in a single night. But as dawn breaks and the storm clouds clear, he steps back to see the bigger picture. He has faced storms before. He has lost crops before. Yet he and his family are still here, still able to plant again, still able to hope for a better season. He remembers that life is not defined by one storm, one loss, but by the resilience to keep going, to keep planting, to keep living. With this perspective, the anger fades, replaced by a quiet determination. If you find yourself overwhelmed by anger, try practicing this Stoic approach. Step back. Ask yourself, how important will this be in a year? In 5 years? In the context of my entire life, is this moment truly worth my anger? Often, you will find that what feels overwhelming now is in fact a small moment in a much larger story. By expanding your perspective, you can find the strength to let go of what does not serve you and to focus instead on what truly matters. Remember the wisdom of Marcus Aurelius. Do not let your thoughts be distracted by what is past or what is yet to come, but let them direct themselves to the present, to the only thing we can truly control. When we see the bigger picture, we let go of the need to control every moment and instead embrace the flow of life, finding peace in the vastness of the journey rather than being consumed by the troubles of a single step. 5. Focus on what you can control. In a world full of uncertainty, the natural tendency is to want to control everything around us. We think that if we can just hold on tight enough, we can shape events, people, and circumstances to fit our expectations. But the Stoics teach us that true peace comes not from controlling the uncontrollable, but from focusing on what lies within our power. When we allow ourselves to become frustrated over things outside of our control, we waste energy that could be spent on what we can change: our own actions, our responses, our attitudes. Imagine Marcus Aurelius dealing with the reality of ruling an empire. At any moment, he could be confronted with news of rebellion, betrayal, or natural disaster, situations entirely beyond his control. He could have easily let the sheer enormity of these problems consume him, feeling overwhelmed by the endless challenges of leading such a vast domain. But instead, Marcus would remind himself of a fundamental Stoic truth: the boundary between what is within his power and what is not. He wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." In doing so, he chose to focus his efforts on what he could influence: his own decisions, his ability to lead by example, and his responses to the inevitable changes around him. Think of a mother who feels overwhelmed by her teenage child's behavior. She wants her child to make better choices, to be more disciplined, to take school seriously. Despite her best efforts, her child continues to struggle, and the mother finds herself growing increasingly frustrated, questioning her own abilities. But one day, she takes a step back and asks herself, what can I truly control in this situation? She realizes she cannot control every action her child takes. What she can do is provide love, support, and guidance. She can control how she responds to her child's mistakes, with patience instead of anger, with understanding instead of criticism. By focusing on what is within her power, she finds a sense of calm and begins to build a stronger connection with her child, rather than letting frustration and helplessness drive a wedge between them. The Stoics believed that focusing on what we cannot control is a recipe for misery. Epictetus once said, "Some things are up to us, and some things are not." This simple statement is a guide to navigating life's challenges. We cannot control what others think of us, but we can control our own actions. We cannot control the outcomes of our efforts, but we can control the effort we put in. When we direct our energy towards things that are outside our influence, we end up feeling powerless and anxious. But when we focus on what is within our reach, we regain a sense of agency and peace. Picture a young entrepreneur working on a new business venture. She has poured her heart and soul into her idea, but despite her best efforts, there are setbacks. Market changes, unexpected competition, challenges she didn't foresee. She finds herself losing sleep, constantly worried about factors beyond her control. But one day, she decides to change her focus. Instead of obsessing over the market or the actions of her competitors, she chooses to focus on her own work, on making her product the best it can be, on how she interacts with her customers, on how she manages her time. This shift doesn't magically make the challenges disappear, but it changes her relationship with them. She no longer feels at the mercy of the market. She feels empowered to do her best with what she has. Focusing on what we can control also involves letting go of the illusion that we are responsible for fixing everything. Marcus Aurelius had to accept that, even as emperor, his power was limited. He could not control the decisions of others, the outcomes of battles, or the forces of nature. What he could control was how he responded, his character, his choices, his ability to remain virtuous in the face of adversity. He understood that inner peace comes not from bending the world to our will, but from aligning our will with what is, and responding to it with wisdom and integrity. Consider a person who has just been laid off from their job. The natural reaction is to feel angry, helpless, and to dwell on the unfairness of the situation. Why did this happen to me? What could I have done differently? These questions, while understandable, keep the person focused on what they cannot change: the past, the decisions of others. Instead, the Stoic approach would be to ask, what can I do now? They might not control the fact that they lost their job, but they can control their next steps. They can update their resume, reach out to contacts, take care of their physical and mental health during the transition. By shifting focus to what lies within their power, they can move forward, rather than getting stuck in anger and regret. Focusing on what we can control also means accepting that some things will not go our way, no matter how much we want them to. It means understanding that outcomes are not entirely within our power, but effort always is. A student preparing for an exam can't control the questions that will be asked, but they can control how much they study, how prepared they feel. A person going on a first date cannot control whether the other person will like them, but they can control their own attitude, their openness, their kindness. This is the essence of Stoic wisdom, placing our energy where it can make a difference, rather than wasting it on things beyond our influence. Imagine a gardener tending to a small patch of vegetables. The weather is unpredictable. Too much rain, too little sun, pests that threaten the crop. The gardener cannot control the weather or every insect that enters the garden, but she can control how she cares for her plants. She can weed, water, and protect them to the best of her ability. She does what she can and accepts what she cannot change. In doing so, she finds peace, knowing that she has done her part. The rest is up to nature. The Stoics teach us that by focusing on what we can control, we free ourselves from unnecessary suffering. We shift our perspective from being victims of circumstance to being active participants in our own lives. This doesn't mean we ignore challenges or pretend that everything is fine. It means we recognize the limits of our influence and make peace with them. We do what we can, and we let go of the rest. If you find yourself overwhelmed, feeling powerless in the face of challenges, try this Stoic practice. Take a moment to list out what is truly within your control and what is not. Then, choose to direct your energy towards what you can influence, your own actions, your thoughts, your responses. By doing this, you reclaim your power, not over the world, but over yourself, which is where true strength lies. As Marcus Aurelius wisely noted, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. By focusing on what you can control, you free yourself from the endless struggle against things beyond your reach. You gain clarity, resilience, and a sense of peace that comes from knowing you are doing your best with what you have. And that, in the end, is all any of us can do. 6. Challenge your angry thoughts. We often think of our angry thoughts as absolute truths. Someone says something that offends us, and immediately a wave of judgment forms in our mind. How dare they? Or, this is completely unacceptable. Our anger feels justified and righteous. But what if, instead of blindly trusting these thoughts, we took a moment to question them? What if, instead of reacting, we asked ourselves, is this thought helping me? Is it even true? Marcus Aurelius, in his reflections, often turned to self-inquiry as a way to bring clarity and wisdom into moments of emotional turmoil. He understood that not every thought that came to his mind was useful or even accurate. He wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." This was a reminder that while we cannot control what others do or say, we do have control over how we interpret those actions, and ultimately, how we respond. Imagine a Roman baker waking early to prepare bread for the day, only to discover that one of his assistants has made a careless mistake, spoiling an entire batch of dough. The first thought that arises in the baker's mind is one of anger. This assistant always messes things up. They don't care about their work. It's tempting to hold on to this thought, to let it grow into resentment, and to lash out. But what if the baker pauses for a moment and challenges this angry thought? What if he asks himself, is this really true? Has this assistant messed up every time? Or is this an exception? Could there be another reason for the mistake? Fatigue, lack of training, or something on their mind? By challenging his initial reaction, the baker opens up space for understanding. Instead of shouting, he chooses to speak with his assistant calmly to find out what went wrong and how they can improve. Anger, instead of driving a wedge, becomes an opportunity for growth and better communication. Challenging your angry thoughts is not about dismissing your feelings or pretending that nothing is wrong. It's about taking a step back to evaluate the situation from a place of reason rather than immediate emotion. Seneca, another great Stoic philosopher, taught that we should treat our emotions as if we are both their master and their servant. In other words, acknowledge your feelings, but don't let them become your master. Ask yourself, is this feeling based on a real threat, or is it a product of my own perception? Think of a father whose teenage daughter comes home late without any explanation. The first thought that arises is a combination of worry and anger. She doesn't respect my rules. She's irresponsible. He feels the urge to confront her with these accusations. But before he speaks, he stops and questions these thoughts. Do I know why she was late? Am I assuming the worst without any information? He decides to speak with her calmly, to listen before jumping to conclusions. It turns out she had a good reason for being late, helping a friend who was in trouble. The anger dissolves, replaced by relief and understanding. By challenging his initial thoughts, the father is able to maintain trust and open communication with his daughter. We all carry certain beliefs that shape how we interpret events around us. Some of these beliefs might be helpful, but others may be limiting or even harmful. Challenging angry thoughts means being willing to question these underlying beliefs. Do you believe that people are always out to get you? Do you assume that every mistake is an intentional slight against you? Marcus Aurelius understood that many of our thoughts are simply habits of mind, patterns we've repeated so often that we accept them without question. He encouraged himself and us to question these patterns and to seek the truth beyond our immediate reactions. Consider a young professional who feels slighted at work. A colleague is chosen to lead an important project, and the immediate thought that surfaces is, "I'm not good enough. I'm always overlooked." The anger grows, mixed with resentment and a sense of injustice. But instead of letting these thoughts dictate her mood and behavior, she decides to challenge them. Is it really true that I'm not good enough? Haven't I been recognized for my work in the past? Could there be other reasons for this decision? By questioning her thoughts, she sees that her reaction was based on fear and insecurity, not on reality. This shift in perspective allows her to approach the situation with curiosity rather than resentment, perhaps even asking for feedback on how to improve for future opportunities. The Stoics teach us that challenging our thoughts is a key part of cultivating a balanced and rational mind. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that most of what we feel comes not from the world itself, but from the stories we tell ourselves about the world. He wrote, "Today I escaped from anxiety," or no, I discarded it because it was within me, in my own perceptions, not outside. This wisdom encourages us to recognize that much of our anger, our frustration, our distress comes from within, not from the external event, but from our interpretation of that event. Picture a woman at a family gathering. A relative makes a comment that she finds hurtful, and immediately the thought comes, "They never respect me. They're always trying to put me down." The anger rises, her heart races, and she considers leaving the event. But instead of acting on this thought, she decides to challenge it. Is it true that they never respect me? Could there be another reason for what they said? Perhaps a misunderstanding, perhaps even a poor attempt at humor. By questioning her reaction, she begins to see the situation more clearly. She chooses to stay, to engage with her family, and even to address the comment directly, but calmly. The evening, instead of being ruined by anger, turns into an opportunity for connection and understanding. Challenging your angry thoughts also helps you break free from patterns that no longer serve you. Often, our angry reactions are habitual. We react the same way to similar triggers over and over again, even if that reaction doesn't actually help us. By questioning these thoughts, we create space for change. We give ourselves the opportunity to respond differently, to choose a path that brings us closer to peace rather than deeper into conflict. If you find yourself overwhelmed by anger, try this Stoic practice. When an angry thought arises, pause and ask yourself, is this true? Is this thought helping me? Is there another way to see this? Write it down if it helps, and look at it objectively, as if it's someone else's thought. Often you'll find that your initial reaction was based on assumptions, fears, or misunderstandings. By challenging these thoughts, you take back control. You decide not to be driven by emotion, but to act from a place of clarity and wisdom. Marcus Aurelius once said, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it. And this you have the power to revoke at any moment." By challenging your angry thoughts, you exercise this power. You remind yourself that your mind is your own, that your thoughts are yours to question and to change. And in doing so, you transform anger from a force that controls you into an opportunity for growth, for understanding, and for true emotional freedom. 7. Practice understanding and kindness. In moments of anger, It is all too easy to forget the humanity of the person standing in front of us. We see only the words that hurt us, the actions that frustrate us, and we respond from a place of defense. But what if, instead of reacting, we took a moment to consider the other person's perspective? What if we chose understanding and kindness over judgment and retaliation? The Stoics taught that, at the core, we are all struggling with our own burdens, our own fears, and our own stories. When we understand this, our capacity for compassion grows, and anger begins to lose its grip on us. Marcus Aurelius, as emperor, was in a unique position where people constantly approached him, some with genuine requests, others with deceit or malice. Yet even in the face of betrayal, Marcus often reminded himself to be kind, to see others as part of the same human family. He wrote, "Whenever you are about to find fault with someone, ask yourself the following question: what fault of mine most nearly resembles the one I am about to criticize?" This simple practice allowed Marcus to temper his reactions, to remember that we are all flawed, and that kindness has the power to bridge the gap where anger might otherwise divide. Imagine a Roman merchant who has just had an intense argument with a supplier. His instinct is to cut ties, to react with anger at what he perceives as disrespect. But later, reflecting in the quiet of his home, he remembers a lesson from Marcus. We are all working towards something, and everyone is fighting their own battle. He decides to approach the supplier again, but this time with understanding. He asks what led to the tension and finds out that the supplier is struggling with personal issues. Instead of anger, he chooses empathy, and together, they find a way forward. The bond between them strengthens, not in spite of the conflict, but because they both chose to understand rather than escalate. Practicing understanding and kindness doesn't mean allowing others to walk over you or ignoring wrongdoings. It means choosing to see the bigger picture, understanding that every person, no matter how difficult, is acting from a place shaped by their own experiences, their own fears, and their own challenges. Seneca once said, "Wherever there is a human being, there is an opportunity for a kindness." In choosing to be kind, we are not just doing something for others. We are freeing ourselves from the bitterness that often accompanies anger. Think about a modern scenario: a customer service representative dealing with an irate customer. The customer is yelling, making demands, and it would be easy to respond with irritation, to match anger with anger. But instead, the representative remembers to pause and consider, why is this person so upset? Could there be something more behind this frustration? They choose to listen, to speak calmly, and to try to help. By approaching the situation with kindness, the tension begins to ease. The customer, who initially felt unheard and frustrated, starts to calm down too. Kindness becomes a bridge that leads them both away from anger and towards resolution. The Stoics also believed that practicing kindness was a way to elevate oneself above petty conflicts and base emotions. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself that others' actions are beyond his control, but his response is entirely his own. When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. They are like this because they cannot tell good from evil. But I have seen the beauty of good and the ugliness of evil, and I will not be affected by it. By expecting that others may act poorly and deciding ahead of time to respond with understanding, Marcus prepared himself to rise above anger, to live in accordance with his values no matter the circumstances. Imagine a teacher dealing with a particularly difficult student, one who constantly disrupts the class, refuses to engage, and seems to take pride in causing trouble. The teacher feels the familiar sting of frustration, the temptation to simply punish and be done with it. But instead, she takes a different approach. She decides to get to know the student, to understand what might be driving this behavior. She learns that the student is struggling at home, that he feels lost and unworthy. Instead of reacting with anger, she chooses compassion. She offers extra help, encouragement, a kind word when it's least expected. Over time, the student begins to change, not because he was forced to, but because someone took the time to understand him. Choosing kindness in the face of anger also has a profound effect on our own well-being. Anger is a heavy burden to carry. It drains our energy, clouds our judgment, and keeps us tied to negativity. By choosing kindness, we let go of this burden. We choose to focus not on what divides us, but on what unites us. This doesn't mean we accept harmful behavior or allow ourselves to be mistreated. It means we choose a response that aligns with our values, rather than being dictated by someone else's actions. Imagine a modern driver, cut off in traffic by someone who seems reckless. The initial surge of anger is almost automatic. How dare they? They could have caused an accident. The temptation is to honk, to shout, to let that anger spill over. But instead, the driver takes a deep breath and imagines what might be happening in that other car. Maybe that person is rushing to the hospital. Maybe they are overwhelmed. Maybe they made a simple mistake. With this perspective, the anger begins to dissipate. The driver chooses not to react, to let it go. The rest of their day remains peaceful, untainted by the negativity of that moment. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one." Choosing kindness and understanding is about embodying the virtues we wish to see in others. It's about being the example rather than demanding it from those around us. When we respond to anger with empathy, we create a ripple effect. Our kindness encourages others to act with kindness. Our understanding invites understanding in return. If you find yourself in a situation where anger is the first response, try this Stoic practice. Take a moment to imagine the other person's perspective. Ask yourself, what might they be feeling? What burdens are they carrying that I cannot see? This doesn't excuse poor behavior, but it allows you to respond from a place of compassion rather than reactivity. It allows you to be the person who breaks the cycle of anger and replaces it with something far more powerful, kindness. As Marcus Aurelius wisely said, the best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury. By choosing understanding and kindness, you rise above the anger, above the pettiness, and become the kind of person who inspires others to do the same. You create a space for healing, for connection, and for true strength, not the strength of force or dominance, but the quiet, enduring strength of the heart. As we conclude this journey through the 7 Stoic strategies to master anger, let us take a moment to reflect on what we've learned. Anger is a natural emotion, one that we all experience. But the true measure of strength lies not in denying our anger or suppressing it, but in understanding it, in guiding it, and in transforming it into something constructive. The Stoics showed us that the path to inner peace is not about avoiding difficult emotions, but about facing them with wisdom, clarity, and intention. Each of these strategies is a tool that can help us navigate the complexities of life. Understanding why we're really angry, pausing before we react, practicing negative visualization, seeing the bigger picture, focusing on what we can control, challenging our angry thoughts, and choosing to practice understanding and kindness. These are not just abstract ideas, they are practical, everyday actions that we can take to reclaim our power and respond to the world in a way that aligns with our highest values. Remember, as Marcus Aurelius said, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. The strength we seek does not come from controlling others or from changing the external world. It comes from within, from choosing how we respond, from cultivating the kind of inner resilience that allows us to remain steady even when the world around us is in turmoil. The next time anger rises within you, remember these lessons. Take a breath, step back, and ask yourself, what is truly within my power here? How can I respond in a way that serves my peace and my purpose? Anger can be a powerful teacher, and by using these Stoic strategies, you can turn moments of frustration into opportunities for growth, connection, and understanding. Thank you for joining me on this exploration of Stoic wisdom. I hope that these ideas inspire you to take action, to reflect deeply, and to live with greater intention and peace. Anger may come and go, but the strength you build within yourself will remain. Until next time, stay calm, stay resilient, and remember, the power to choose your response lies in your hands.